Welcome to Work is Weird Now. Today we have Emy Cragoe with us. She is the co-founder of Ori, a new platform rethinking how people understand themselves, navigate their careers, and communicate their value in the changing world of work. After redundancy prompted her own career rethink, Emy is now building Ori to help people uncover their strengths, connect with mentors, and discover career paths that genuinely fit who they are and where they want to go. And with Emy today, we are going to explore the core question of, you've been made redundant. Now what? So, provocative question. Welcome, Emy. Nice to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, why don't we dive right in and have you tell us a little bit about what happened to you when you were made redundant and then how that led you to where you are today?
Yes, so it was just before Christmas, which is never the best time to receive that news. But it was a work from home day, actually. And it came a little bit out of the blue. There had been some waves of redundancies, but I was starting to feel unhappy where I was currently working, and I felt like I'd lost my mojo. And so to me, to hear that news obviously was a shock, but it wasn't the most disappointing because I was sort of on my way out already, mentally at least. But I, had amazing people around me, basically my support network, saying to me, okay, you've just received really sort of scary, anxiety-inducing news. Like, just literally pause, take a breath. Don't, think about what next straight away. I remember I left the house because it was, tools down straight away. And I just went for a walk and tried to just process the news that I'd just been given. And yeah, I'd been in marketing for 8 years up to that point, from sort of boutique to startup to big corp. And so I think it took me a few months to realize that chapter, or little did I know, but that chapter was closing. And so, yeah, it took a while to kind of get used to that feeling, but I gave myself a good few weeks to kind of reset, which was the best thing that I did in that moment.
You said it was one of the best things to happen to you. You said that now, obviously, with years behind you. Did it feel like that at the time?
It didn't, not immediately. It took some time for that feeling to settle in. And actually, I definitely recognize that feeling a lot more now, I don't know, a year and a half or almost 2 years onwards from that. Funny enough, when you speak to founders, some of them also had been made redundant, and that's why they started businesses. So for them also, it was a blessing in disguise. But no, it took some time for me to get my head around what I was going to do with myself. I knew that I didn't want to go back into marketing. As I said, I'd done 8 years. That for me felt like that was over. Having said that, I did then end up working with someone I used to work with, who was starting his own sort of marketing agency, AI startup, and I did that for a few months. But that gave me a really great insight into the startup world, and so that was super valuable. But it was an agency, so I knew it wasn't for the long term. But no, I also work with a career coach, and actually that's really what I think sort of kickstarted the mindset shift that I had, starting to do introspective work, and asking myself a series of questions and kind of digging a bit deeper into what my values were, my why, my skills, my strengths. And funny enough, a lot of that is actually what kind of brought me to building Ori, or was that early inspiration for building the platform that we're building at the moment.
So, why do you think you didn't know these things before? Right? So, what happened to you earlier in your education, your career, and so on that meant that you were on a path that you didn't necessarily want to be on, not necessarily understanding what you were good at?
Well, it's very easy to blame certain groups of people in your life. I mean, ultimately, I think I was never potentially equipped with the right tools from an early age to do that self-discovery. I mean, there's people around me who have gone to therapy and they've therefore learned more about themselves. But I think if I really go back to like my more, I guess, formative years of education, school, university, I think this is actually a broad view that people tend to agree with, is that there isn't the right guidance nor support at school or university to help you understand or be prepared for the world of work. Certainly at my school, I don't remember there being any one-to-one guidance. At university, I was so shocked at how poor it was. Even having spoken to people at prestigious US universities who, God knows how much they're spending, the support there is very, very basic and sort of templatized. So I think it really starts there. I also think that parents grew up in a very different time, and the workplace now looks very different. I mean, even more different to how I experienced it when I started experiencing it sort of 8 years ago. And so the feedback that they're giving, ultimately they want to help their children, but it's not necessarily the correct research guidance, should I say. And so this like very traditional view of go to school, go to university, get an internship or graduate scheme, and then get your first job is, I think, super outdated. People are always talking about, the kind of career ladder. Well, that career ladder is being broken. It looks very, very different now. I think someone called it the other day a career lattice. It's sort of directions are all over the place. And so actually, I think in some ways, a lot of people are finding that guidance now in AI, but I actually think a lot of the guidance now has to be with people who've lived that experience, who are a bit older. I mean, that takes me into a direction of something completely different, which is mentorship. But I do really feel passionately about that because of the lack of support that we're seeing in sort of early education.
So interesting you say that. It took me back to our podcast with Holly Hobbs last year, and she said exactly the same. Like, she's a driving force in the world of apprenticeships, and she just said, "Why are we not getting mindset coaching?" And she's lucky enough to have been able to fund that herself, but it would be very, very different. And I think back to when I was in school, you were almost pigeonholed by what grade you were at or what you were forecasted about. So the grade A students were going to be lawyers, doctors, yada yada. Middle of the road, this was your career progression over here, and it is so different now, as you say. Yeah. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I think there's this difference between career advisors and career coaches, right? And I don't know if that is an actual technical difference, but in terms of the meaning behind those words, what feels irrelevant right now are career advisors, because as you said, Emmy, they often are of a generation where work looked different. So actually telling people that they should look at this career path or this career path isn't necessarily helpful and useful information now. Whereas if you have a coach, in theory, what they're actually looking at is more about looking inwards as opposed to outwards, right? That's what you're talking about here. And that is actually arguably a far more useful skill to have at this moment in this crazy, weird world of work that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, I mean, actually, there's three sort of guidance profiles, let's call it. So there's mentors, career coaches, and something that I actually learned recently, which is sponsors, which is probably my favorite of the three, and I'll explain why. Mentors are typically free of charge, and they impart on their own lived experience and share that to hopefully give you some guidance, and it can even bleed into life, for example. So got a family for the first time that may have had a family, they can impart on their experience of work-life balance, raising children, etc. A career coach is typically, or you'd hope, sort of accredited or certified in that coaching, and they have a much more structured plan or approach to guidance, and typically it's actually supporting the individual to find their own way through to the solution or to, I guess, clarity. So it's more of like a supported, in the same way that maybe therapy can be as well. And then sponsorship or sponsors are people who truly believe in you as someone who has talent and opens the doors to the right rooms for you. So like introduces you to the right people in the hope that you're then gonna get the right leads to find an opportunity, which I'd never heard of before. And that sounds amazing to me.
So what advice would you have for people who suddenly find themselves made redundant at any stage in their career, early, middle, late? Obviously, they're going to have slightly different concerns when that happens, depending on their life situation. But what kind of general advice would you provide?
So I actually made a TikTok about this, and I think I kind of gave it in like a 3-step process. But ultimately, I would say the first thing to do that really helped me is, like I said, just really pause and reflect, and don't just automatically chase the next thing. Obviously, people will have different timelines on when they need to get that next job, but pausing and reflecting was what I needed to kind of reassess what my next step was going to be. I think in some way people, and this sounds weird to say, but I almost think that people who are being made redundant now or in the next sort of year or so are actually quite fortunate. I mean, the stats are that 6 million workers are insecure about their jobs in the UK. So there are actually lots of people in companies currently who aren't finding job satisfaction. And there was a Harvard review that actually linked work-life satisfaction with just life satisfaction in Gen Z. So I think if you're kind of given that push to leave a company, then you've got the opportunity to completely almost like reinvent yourself and like recarve that path for you. And I think that doesn't necessarily mean that, when you're older, that's, you can no longer have that opportunity. I think AI, because it's lower the barrier to entry to really upskill yourself, reinvent yourself, like literally position yourself completely differently to how you might have been before. Redundancy, I think, is giving you the opportunity to do that now, because ultimately you don't have a choice. Like you have to find that next switch. And so I would say ultimately be of the mindset that this is going to be an amazing change for you, not maybe in the short term, but the long term. More and more people now are starting businesses. You have sort of solopreneurs, again, because of how accessible these AI tools are, the low code, no code, like Lovable. That was actually a platform that I use as the first iteration of Ori. And I've got no background in engineering or building platforms, right? So I would say, yeah, just see this as a really great opportunity, and then go out there. Like, don't stay at home. Really put yourself out there. If you feel like you need that confidence boost, then that might be working with a career coach who can kind of help that side of yourself, or really lean into your network. I've spoken recently to people in very senior exec positions who they're really leaning in on their network, rather than working with sort of CEO or C-suite recruiters. They're much more leaning onto their network, and they're going to events. Fortunate enough to live in London, like I am, there are thousands of different clubs, communities that are for all different people, and you will find people who are like-minded, and essentially you just never know where your next opportunity is going to come, but it's definitely not going to be sat at home twiddling your thumbs. So I say just get out there and just try and say yes to as much as you can.
It really, what you've just been saying really reminds me of when I'd resigned. I was in my notice period before setting up my own business. And I remember having a chat with one of my peers, and he was like, Dan, this is so liberating what you're about to do. And I was like, no, it's terrifying. And I appreciate there'll be people who've just been made redundant listening to this thinking, no, I'm scared. And it is, you can glass half empty, glass half full. And I imagine that you've got to maybe have your moment where you're terrified by it, but then also, right, what is that next opportunity, and have that bright horizon outlook and go, okay, let's just not leave any stone unturned and go for it, right? But I imagine that some people, you were saying, and this was in the discovery call, that people often don't know what they're really good at. And when something like a redundancy happens, or a big decision to set up on your own, will make you look at those things. Like, why do you think people kind of miss understanding what they're good at?
They might just not be having the right conversations, or at least it's just not what they think is important. I think we've been so reliant on the CV being your ticket into a job, and a CV, I think, I think it's 3,000, it's thousands of year old, the concept of a CV, right? It doesn't work for the way that people are finding jobs anymore. We're actually seeing more and more companies, more in the startup and sort of tech end, but not actually even ask for a CV, right? So there's now this interest in your softer skills. And so people who maybe aren't starting to prioritize asking themselves what their skills are, what their soft skills are, or essentially like what their maybe expertise is, really should start asking themselves those questions. And it sounds obvious, but actually even just asking your friends, asking your family to tell you what you're good at. I actually had this idea, which I've not executed yet, but of having a dinner party with my girlfriends, and we all tell each other, okay, I think these are your top 4 skills. These are the areas that, if I had an issue, I would call you first. This is the kind of thing that I think you could speak about in front of 300 people. Probably be difficult to ask them, what are your weaknesses? And people might be a bit biased, but I think even just asking people around you, like, what do you think I'm good at? And what do you think I have, experience talking about? And I think those are really important questions to start asking people around you. And then that kind of feeds into the sort of softer skills that you may start to identify within yourself.
I
Yeah.
love that idea. Like, and the dinner
I
party
know.
thing, the positives are great, but also that should be your safe space to bring up the areas to develop, right? Because
Mm.
a client, if you're going out on your own, a client or somebody you're about to work with will give you the feedback. Like, the plaster will be ripped off. So I think creating that safe space with whoever it is, such a beautiful idea. I love it. Sign us up. We'll come.
It's definitely on the radar for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talk about this a lot. We've referenced this quite a lot across a number of episodes, but it's just so relevant, it bears repeating. I think, our parents' generation were expected to stay effectively with one job in one company their entire career. Ours was different. As the next generation coming in, you're going to have multiple jobs, but all effectively building towards some sort of linear CV-friendly path that stays in one field, but maybe moves jobs every 5 years or so. And now we're looking at a reality where people are expected to have multiple careers across the course of their lives. And I think that obviously rips up the idea of a CV, because effectively you have to communicate multiple linear careers across one piece of paper. But I think also it does make the case for having something foundational that sits there and carries across all of those careers. And that is very much formulated of just what are your kind of core skills, your capabilities, the natural instincts that you bring to the roles that you have. And obviously that's not immovable. You can develop new skills, but I think just having a fundamental understanding of what you add and keeping revisiting that throughout the course of your career is obviously really valuable as well, because that's not going to stay the same as, the day that you enter the workforce. So yeah, I think it's just a really interesting model. I think I have another question for you, which I think is maybe slightly tangential, but I think about this often. So when you're made redundant, I believe there is a risk, or the perception of a risk, that if you put your availability on LinkedIn and say, I'm looking for a job, that actually you look undesirable or desperate. I'd love to get your opinion on that.
That's a great question.
That is a
Great
good question. Well, I think it's interesting. I think if you'd asked me that question 10 years ago, well, before I was even working, but when I think maybe it might have been slightly not frowned upon, but a bit, it's seen as a massive negative, right? I think redundancy is almost happening so often, and we're seeing such a huge, at least I'm seeing on LinkedIn, such a huge outpour of support when people are made redundant. We've seen like mass redundancies at companies like Meta, and then you start to see people just outpour to, poor Sam who's just been made redundant, and there's hundreds of people commenting, sharing their feedback and sort of references and offers for support, and that's a really beautiful thing. I almost feel like being made redundant isn't actually something to be ashamed of. I think it's what you're doing with that time that most people maybe don't get is actually the most important thing. So casting back, I've never hidden the fact that I got made redundant. I openly talk about it on TikTok, and I'll tell anyone that that's what happened. But I think when that's followed up with, I worked with a career coach, then I worked at a sort of marketing startup, and then I started a business. Like, it shows that obviously I've kind of shifted my mindset, and I've rethought about where I wanted to go, and I've kind of done the work, I guess, to think really carefully about my next move. So yeah, I think it's more about what if you talk about what you plan on doing because of that redundancy. Lots of people are saying, I'm going to do an MBA, or I'm going to, upskill in AI, dedicate, 20 hours a week on learning how to be an expert in Claude design, for example. Then I think it takes away a lot of the sort of the bad taste, or like the taboo, or people feeling ashamed of being made redundant, because ultimately, like, we're seeing redundancies everywhere, and the stats are showing that AI is causing all of these redundancies. Deutsche Bank just came out by saying this term of AI redundancy washing, where employers are saying that it's due to AI, but ultimately it's more likely due to overhiring and overspending kind of post-COVID. So again, like, I think to me it's normalized. Like, if someone becomes redundant that I see in my network, I kind of go, oh, that's really, it really sucks, but you're gonna do amazing things, and it's better kind of move away from that place and kind of start fresh.
And then I guess the next question is about momentum, because often you see people leave and then they think, well, now I've got, and to your point, I think there's definitely some value in taking some time off and reflecting, but I think there's also a feeling, and you can tell me whether this is right or wrong, that actually striking while the iron's hot, while you still got those recent contacts, while there still is that story to tell, well, is really vital. First of all, do you agree with that? Do you think the momentum part is essential?
So I would agree with the momentum part. I mean, the root of the word redundancy means wave. So, there's a sense of momentum that's kind of gearing up over time, kind of waves retreating and advancing. So there definitely is a sense of momentum that comes with redundancy. That's why I think it's so important to think about who your network is and continue nurturing it. And if you can, think about reconnecting with people every 3 to 6 months, and because you ultimately never know what tomorrow is going to bring. And I definitely, I was always quite client facing in my role, so I was quite good, I think, and just like maintaining a network and kind of seeing people relatively often. And I would say to young people as well, like, I don't think you're ever too young to network. And network doesn't necessarily mean going to a really stuffy conference where you do sort of network icebreakers and it's sort of speed networking. It could also be your local run club, book club, starting to kind of make friends or a network. I think those can be slightly interchangeable, and kind of starting to understand like how you keep up with people from a young age and how you nurture that.
What do you tell people who have been
Yes,
out of the workforce for some time and are maybe feeling a bit dejected?
that's a difficult one for me to answer, only because I've not experienced that through lived experience. However, I've definitely felt stagnant at work, which could feel a little similar, although you, I guess, don't have the pressures of having to find the next thing that's gonna, keep you kind of surviving. But what I would say is, and this could be taken as, again, very basic, but I don't think it's talked about enough, which is I try and move my body every day, every morning. Moving my body, doing some exercise gets my mind in the right place. It shifts my mindset. It makes me feel more positive. It makes me feel more motivated. It makes me have greater clarity. I can express myself better. I think we talk about wellness as like a very physical manifestation, and you kind of look better and you might kind of feel better, happier. But actually, I think there's so many benefits to also just helping you to be in the right mindset. And I think so much of it comes from just mindset. And I was listening to Tim Spector. I actually saw him at an event, and he was talking about how the gut is connected to the brain. And so like what you're feeding your gut ultimately is feeding your brain. So if you're feeding it crap, then your brain is going to feel crappy, right? And that's no position to put yourself in if you have to try and keep the momentum, keep the motivation, keep the focus, and just like not give up on that search. But to round off your question, as much as I think that the physicality and moving your body is important, it's again another reason why I've created Ori, because I think the tools out there are so fragmented. LinkedIn's become a social media platform essentially, or somewhere to kind of add people you'd never met. For the most part, it obviously has like massive benefits as well, don't get me wrong. And then there's other platforms where it's sort of like, automatic AI applications to jobs, or there's, mentorship platforms that focus on mentorship. I wanted to bring all those pieces together. So I'm hoping that the plan is by building Ori, it's a solution geared to those people who have, not clear on their way forward, like I felt, and kind of lack of clarity and feeling disconnected to their, I guess, professional selves, and trying to regain that mojo back. And that was a huge part of why I created what I created. So if you're listening and you've been feeling that way, it's been kind of built for you.
So tell us all about it.
Yes, so Ori was genuinely an idea that came to me through lived experience, as I've said. I realized how fractured the workplace and kind of jobs marketplace felt and was looking. And I had spoken to lots of people who were working at, amazing companies like McKinsey and JP Morgan, and were feeling kind of in their mid-career super unsatisfied. And I thought this was disheartening, disappointing, and was thinking, okay, there needs to be a solution to that. I got introduced to my business partner through a mutual connection, and we just had a meeting of minds. We both agreed that something needed to change and there was an opportunity to do that. So we met in August. In November, we started building. And sort of over the few months, it's basically turned into what Ori is today, which is an AI careers intelligence platform, which through questionnaires and psychometric assessments gets to understand you and your goals and strengths and matches you to various occupations. It's a sort of one-stop shop for career progression and career development. And we want this to be something that people use not only when they need to find a job, but when they want to progress even in their current job. They want to get that promotion. They want to be a better manager. So it's really to help individuals at any age to, be able to reach their full professional potential.
Sounds great.
And when does it launch?
We're due to launch in August, though that might be just a beta round, so potentially the following month. But you can already visit us at ori.careers to sign up to our waitlist, either as a user, a mentor, or a career coach.
Okay. Is this for everybody at any point in their careers?
For everybody at any point in their careers. From conversations I've been having, it sounds like a lot of sort of university leavers. It really rings true to them because they have no idea how to navigate the sort of first next step, but equally for pivoters. So people, between 25 and 45 who are feeling like they need to kind of twist in their careers and find the next thing that's going to truly make them feel happy and satisfied and feel that purpose as well.
Amazing. So how can people find out about it? Where do they go?
So you can find us at ori.careers. That's our website, and there's a wait list there to get access when we launch. We're also on Instagram at ori.careers, or you can find me on TikTok at emy.cragoe.
Great. Perfect. Well, best of luck with it. And hopefully people will reach out and sign up for the wait list. So yeah, fingers crossed.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
Thanks so much.
Thank you
It's great
so
to
much
have
for
you.
having me. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.